Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Above the Bar podcast, where each week we belly up to the bar with a new guest, find out what they do, who they are, and what makes them great. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Alrighty, folks, welcome back to the Above the Bar podcast. It's your host, Sean. We've bellied up to the bar today with a gentleman who, let's say, I get it wrong, but I think we figured it out beforehand. He wrote 5 since we were just talking. He wrote somewhere around like
it's six.
Oh, it's 6 now. Son of a gun. Like 450 books. He's got like movies. He's got screenplays. He's on Twitter. I mean, what more could we ask for? He's had charitable organizations, which everybody, if you know me, you know I love a good charitable organization. Bellying up to the bar with us from parts unknown, hanging out, and he wears a bandana well. There's only one other person that I know of that wears a bandana this well, and I can't think of his name right now. It's what's his name from the E Street Band, Little Steven is the only other person that I know that wears a bandana as well as our guest today, Mr. Mickey Z.
Thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited.
Brother, I mean, parts unknown. You like that? I always liked when they said, coming in from parts unknown.
Back in the old wrestling days, right?
You already got our favorite transcendental dancer, Miss Cody, hanging out. She posted pictures earlier today. She's at like a girls' weekend already, and it's only Wednesday, so I don't know how that works out. But
is it from last weekend or this coming weekend?
You never know. Like Cody, we love Cody. Every time I turn around, I look and see pictures, and it's like she's in Costa Rica, she's in Paris, like she's always somewhere. My man Nate's there, so everybody's already showing up. So we're gonna get into it real quick. Before we get too far, as always, folks, over my right shoulder, if you're watching the live, we got the big board for sticker and a cause. If you got something you believe in, Cody, you got to get me some transcendental stickers, maybe some transcendental dance stickers. If you got something you believe in, something you support, I don't care if it's a web page or a Facebook page like the Flock that Nathan runs. If you're a big Ravens fan, if you got a page like Cody does with her transcendental dances, whatever it is that you got going on, send it on out to us. You can reach me at Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, TikTok, Instagram, even our email. They're all the Above the Bar podcast. Send me a message. Let me know what you got. I'll give you the address where to send it, and we'll read it live here on the air. Everybody's already showing up for you, Mickey. It's Happy Paranormal Day. Is it? It was also Lumpy Rug Day. I found out today.
Well, that kind of blends with paranormal,
because it could be a ghost in the lumpy rug.
Exactly.
So all those things. And as always, we have our sponsors. Our newest sponsors, Budget Blinds of East Greenbush, a locally owned and operated window covering franchise that offers a high quality custom blind shades, shutters, and drapes at affordable prices. Their knowledgeable and experienced team is dedicated to providing excellent customer service and helping you find the perfect window treatment to fit your style and budget. Stay up to date with your latest products, promotions, and design tips by following them on Facebook and Instagram at Budget Blinds of East Greenbush. You know what's something else they offer there, Mickey, that I think is pretty amazing? We were talking about this beforehand, and do you know what an NQA warranty is?
You asking me? Yeah. No questions asked.
No questions asked. So they offer a no questions asked warranty. That means if if your poltergeist throws your lumpy rug through, and Lisa Marie's on here, and this is even more important. Lisa Marie will tell you if your haunted dolls throw your lumpy rug at their poltergeist boyfriend and it breaks your blinds, no questions asked for 5 years, one time. They'll replace them for free.
I love the synchronicity there. That was
it all works together. Yeah. Because Lisa Marie has 60 haunted dolls.
Oh.
And then Cody has this monstrous mastiff. And yes, her mastiff is ridiculous. So we're all here. Everything's done. The bar is wide open. How are you, Mickey?
I'm doing well. I'm real happy to be here.
And I appreciate that you have a nice mic. You're set. You are ready to go.
Yeah, well, I do a podcast, so
Yeah, and that's right. So yours is the post woke podcast.
yes.
Now, give everybody kind of a breakdown, and we're going to touch all kinds of things, but in all of them in an appropriate and asked way. But it's perfect for post woke, right? But
Yes.
what is post woke?
Well, in the big picture, Post Woke, the podcast is part of a Substack, which is called Post Woke. So since I'm a writer, as you noted earlier, I post articles every day, but once a week or so, I do an interview podcast. The general concept of why it's called Post Woke is because, should I ruin the mystique of the parts unknown and tell you where I'm from?
Give the parts unknown.
Okay, so it's New York City, born and raised. And
I would have never heard that with your accent.
I
I'm
know.
walking here.
How you doing? So I grew up in New York City, got involved in activism in what would have been called traditionally back then left before there was such a thing as woke. And while I was involved, it began this transition towards what is today called woke. And I have long since extricated myself from that and become more of what I call the free agent. I try not to attach to any one ideology. And so the podcast name, I thought effectively uh, described where I'm at. And it's kind of clickbaity where people want to know, hey, what's this about? So it draws people in. They want to know what's going on, and even people who identify as woke want to know what's going on. So that's the basic premise.
So now, how long have you been doing your show?
Since November 2021, so
All right.
I have about half as many episodes as you. I'm about 80, 81 episodes.
Look, you broke the 10 barrier. That I tell people this all the time. If you can get past 10 podcasts on a regular basis, you broke the barrier. That's the magic number. Most people can't get past 10 because they can't put in the effort. Look at that. Cody's even singing to you. She's saying "Oh Mickey, you're so fine." Little musical interlude. And yes, we
Yeah.
will make many left turns there, Nate. But it's interesting. I'm trying to think. God, I can't think of his name right now. The comedian and I actually like him a lot, Patton Oswalt. He just recently talked about this, and I wanted to get, especially with your show name, I wanted to get your vibe on this and see what you thought. He talks about, he feels like he's pretty woke, he's pretty liberal, and if you know Patton, you would say,
Yeah.
um, but he says at some point in his life, he will no longer be able to be woke. Not because he's not supporting anything. It's just things will go so far
Yes.
to that end that he's going to be like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that was, how am I supposed to? And he uses the analogy of people messing around with their clones, sleeping with their clones is his analogy. But what are your thoughts? What I mean, especially since you do a show about that basic topic there. What's your thoughts that will we at some point reach a point where I can't be that woke like that? We're so far past there.
Well, I personally have reached that point, and to phrase from my perspective, it was an interesting experience. I'm somebody that's constantly evolving, but to some point, the wokesters abandon me more so than me abandoning them. They just keep moving into this sort of totalitarian direction. And when I was involved, let's say go back 11, 12 years ago, Occupy Wall Street.
Oh, I
I,
remember that.
yeah, so it wasn't the word woke was never used while I was there. And so it was when the park was up and running, there was a pretty broad group of people there, and I felt like I could relate to each person about a couple of things. I wasn't Nobody should have to march in lockstep. What's happened since then is that this strange phenomenon where the people I once collaborated with who talked about free speech and no censorship have become the champions of thought police, groupthink, you know, just really keeping an eye on what words you say, and words are violence, and so I think they've way in fact, I would say I know they have seriously overplayed their hand. Like they came into this with some good ideas and then went off the rails. And what they do, to my mind, is more accurately called virtue signaling than activism, because they're just basically more concerned with appearances. They just want to look like they're caring about all the oppressed people, that people they consider to be oppressed, but they're not really doing anything for them. And anyone who doesn't march with them is the enemy. So it turns into what feels to me like more like fascism, while they like to have a group like Antifa, which is short for anti-fascist, to be policing people's words goes well beyond irony at this point. So at some point I just said, um, I came into this with good intentions. I have a natural tendency to keep evolving and keep my options open, and be ready to find out that I'm wrong about stuff. So those two converged and I just drifted away, but no longer felt the need to be part of a group, but wanted to be sort of what, like I said, a free agent, but also open to learning and interacting with all kinds of people. So that's what the Substack has been about.
Gotcha. And I agree with Cody. Extremes are extremes. We must always find balance, non-emotional solutions for balance for the greater good of all. It's funny.
Amen.
When I was in the Marine Corps, I used to have buddies, and uh, one of the guys, his name was Graham. I'll never forget the dude. We used to just make fun of him because one day in a kid's house, he was like, "Hey, you got some Java? Got some Java?" And like, why would you ask this kid for coffee? He's 17, 18 years old. But he had the great he told me something that I've used throughout my life and my career. Take the emotion out of it. When you think about it, take the emotion out of it. If you can communicate what you want without emotion in it, people can listen to it. But when you stick your emotion in it, people cut you right off.
Yeah.
Because you just sound you could have the greatest facts in the world. You just sound emotional at that point, which you're no longer a rational thinker, no matter how smart you are.
Yeah, and you're actually giving them what they're looking for.
Mhm.
I was listening to a podcast yesterday in which this legitimately female swimmer was complaining about men who say they were women swimming against her, and then she was physically attacked. And what the group that was attacking her is craving is that emotional interaction, because as you said, they don't have the facts to debate with you, but they can be louder. And the thing is they're louder at times, but they're still the minority. And what I don't like to speak into existence that a small minority of extremists are taking over. They're just loudest on Twitter, but then they're not the majority. And what I've learned since I moved away from any one particular ideology is there's just a lot of level-headed, sort of middle of the road folks out there who just want to interact. There you go, who want to interact and are totally okay with disagreeing with me on some things, learning from me on others, and vice versa. And that's what I'm interested in, because even the facts, I'm somebody, one of my 585 books, two of them are annotated history books.
You just wrote to him while you were sitting there, didn't you?
Yeah, that's the mother hens over here. Um, uh, I have a couple of annotated historical type of books where that side of me, where I could be very analytical and detail oriented. Which, side note, I appreciate that you hype this episode as like how to live a creative life, because I
Yeah.
feel like sometimes my creative side doesn't get as much credit. But I've learned the hard way that sometimes even the documented facts aren't enough. That there has to be this blend of interacting with people with authenticity that gains the credibility with them, and then you could allow your emotions to come out sincerely. You could speak of the facts that you know. And it's I definitely agree with you. The emotions just turn it into an argument.
That's it.
Sometimes the facts just their eyes glaze over, and then so I'm like, I'm still searching for that middle ground. To be honest with you.
We call ourselves libertarians. Um, we're the middle ground.
Okay.
We we don't we don't want you to touch our money. We don't want you to touch our guns, and we don't care who you sleep with and who you're friends with. We're called libertarians. That's really what you're looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting because coming out of the left, the libertarians were demonized
Yeah.
by by like without even any analysis of what they're doing. And when I learned a little bit more about libertarians, I found, like I think you would with only with any reasonable like morally minded group, that there's some things I may be like, I'm not so sure about that. But I tell you one thing, I was lining up with the libertarian perspective over the past 3 years in
Well,
terms of bodily autonomy and just
here
general autonomy. And suddenly it's like, and I very, very recently have taken to really educating myself more on guns issues, because I am not a gun person. And so I just sort of watched the debate, which I've learned is a falsely defined debate. And then when I interviewed someone on my podcast who runs a website called gunfacts.info, in which he says that he's not taking a side. The side he's taking is accuracy. And so
yeah,
he looks at the arguments that are out there, and then he lays out the documented facts about who's saying what, who's accurate. And I have to say it was utterly eye-opening, where and I'm open to learning.
what's it called again?
Gunfacts.info.
Here, I gotta throw these out real quick. Nate, you were absolutely right. We don't teach the right things in school. I'll tell you a funny one, Nate, that'll really blow your mind. Go look up the Canadians during the Second World War. You want to find out who were monster beasts that aren't the polite Canadians that just wave at everybody that we think here in America. Those dudes were doing things in the Second World War that could have went to the Hague. Have no doubt about that. And then Cody, you're right. Why can't we all just identify as human beings and get along? No, Nate, I am not a human. I am a Marine. It's a totally different thing. But if you ever here, I'm going to give you my two favorites, Mickey, because I think you'll appreciate this. If you ever want to piss off somebody who's way too far on the right side, two arguments that'll really fire them up. You ready to fire them up?
Absolutely.
The first one is you ask them why California gun laws are so restrictive and who put them in place. And they'll say, well, it was these left liberals, blah, blah, blah. And then you educate them that it was actually Ronald Reagan
Yeah.
who did it because he didn't like the fact that the Black Panthers were walking around open carrying, and he was concerned with this. So, as a basically a completely racist move, he had the laws changed so they couldn't do it, and it affected all of California. A- And then you get these people with the statues, getting also upset about the
Yeah.
statues. You let them know that most of those statues were put up during the 1950s and were directly put up as a fight against desegregation. And they would put them up. And if you notice, they're all World War or Civil War generals and captains that were just the most racist. Every single one of them was. It's not like this statue was put up, right after this person passed away and they put a statue up
Okay.
for them. They put them up in the 1950s as we were trying to desegregate and integrate our population. They were put up as like this direct, like, fine, you can go to schools, but every day you're going to have to walk past this statue
Oh, I
of,
did not know
of,
that.
what was his name? Because Fort Bragg is the worst one of them all. General Bragg, Captain Bragg, whatever. He was like a horrible human being, absolute degenerate, horrible human being. Yeah, it's
Wow. I didn't know that part. So
yeah.
the in around 2020, when that was kind of catching fire, that they wanted to pull
Oh,
statues down, there were some good points in their argument, not necessarily in their tactics, but they had some points. Okay, that's good to know.
yeah. If you look that one up, I love throwing that one at them. Um, I like harassing everybody, but I agree with you having the open mindset. But but the podcast kind of feeds to that, and you kind of alluded to it, that creative side for you. You are, I joke around like I think we're up to 650 books at this point. But how many books have you written?
It's actually 12. Yeah.
Written 12 books, but five is it five of them were picked up
Oh
for
no, all of them. These were published primarily before digital publishing became a thing. So when we go back to my earlier books, it's the early days of the internet, when I had an agent who still brought a physical manuscript to a publisher, who would they would have a couple of people read it, and then we'd have a meeting, human beings in the same room, believe it or not, and we would talk about the book and then perhaps sign a contract, and it wouldn't come out in a week because it was all digital. It would take quite a while because the technology wasn't up to par. But so I have 12 books total like that, but the later ones were more in the digital age. But some of them are nonfiction, some of them are fiction. I believe all of them would qualify as creative. Interesting, just to dovetail it to the earlier part of our conversation. A bunch of them I look at now and I'm like, I'm not that person anymore. Like I'm not ashamed of them. I don't disown them, but I don't feel connected to them. I mean, I have copies of them for my own, edification, but I don't necessarily look at them and say, "Oh, I want to show this off as what I wrote." But it was a big part of my life. I decided to become a writer very early on, so getting books published was a major goal, and it felt like a major accomplishment. So yeah, today it's the book publishing has changed so much that, and I feel like my thoughts and opinions and just learning new facts from you tonight, I feel like to write a book, it would be obsolete by the time I finish typing it. So I don't feel any impetus right now to write a full length book, but I do post every day on Substack. So collectively, you could turn it into a book, I suppose, as a collection of essays.
Well, that was what's his name? Charles Dickens. You know,
Yeah,
Dickens was an early blogger. If you really want to look at it something
it's a
in a
great
way,
point.
he was just dropping a little bit of nuggets to keep the
Yeah,
money rolling in. But now you talk about you've published in the uh, when the traditional and I hate all in the old days back in my day, but the more traditional of what we thought of, you had to give it to an agent, they had to pitch your book, you had to sit down with people. So you published in those days and now publishing today, if you were gonna looking at the two of them, what is your vibe? Because you can and Cody's kind of hinting at it right now. I'm gonna have AI help me write mine. Finally, I have someone to fix my punctuation. Well, that's Grammarly will do that for you.
yeah.
But she brings that point up. I have 5 chapters of a book and I dropped it into Chat GPT because I wanted to see what it would do. And it rewrote the whole chapter for me. And if I drop each one of them in there and I can tell it, finish writing this book, it'll finish writing my book for me.
Yeah.
What is your vibe? Like, as somebody who is so creative, has that creative gene in them, do you think that AI piece is damaging the writing, or is it opening up for more people like myself who maybe I have a great story in my head, I can get part of it down, but I'd have a problem finishing it?
Well, I'm fine with the Grammarly aspect of it because spelling, punctuation, grammar, they're challenging. And I have personally known some incredibly talented writers who very much needed an editor. And so, um, but when we ask AI to change content and like perhaps let's say it's a novel and start adding characters or changing the age of your character, I'm personally not comfortable with that. I don't want to. I, to me, I want I like the hashtag stay human. I really want us to maintain our humanity in a time period where transhumanism is more and more coming into play, and I don't. So I'm kind of cautious here in the sense that I think AI can, like any other tool, can be reformed to work for us. But unfortunately, the control over AI as of now is by a group of people that I would call the parasite class, or I call them the powers that shouldn't be. These powerful people that are calling the shots control so much of the technology that I can't look at that technology and deem it neutral because it's if you have what's called artificial intelligence, human beings are creating these programs. So therefore they're colored by the perceptions, whether they know it or not, they're colored by the perceptions of the humans who are creating it. So it's not neutral, it's not unbiased, and if anything, it's going to be biased in the favor of the billionaire class over you and I. So I have a lot of questions. But that's not to say that I look at AI as something as black and white, like as impossible to be something positive. But I think the system in which we live has to be seriously factored into any conversation about it.
Now you talk about the powers that be in behind these systems. What There's a lot of people that have a lot of theories on that. Like, do you think it's do you subscribe to the Illuminati theory? Do you subscribe to any of these different ones that are out there that they say, well, this is the group that's actually running this. This is the group behind this. Or do you think that it's more because you watch it on the news and it's, some kid in Silicon Valley type world that has come up with this and they've worked it out, IBM or somebody like that. What's your vibe there?
Yeah, I'm not going to go into Illuminati territory, but it's we have a long enough documented history of elite powers, and I say elite with scare quotes because
I know
there's
what you
nothing.
mean.
Yeah, like the long term bankers, the Fed, the intelligence agencies, like they wield unelected power, and in fact, a lot of bureaucracy. Like the presidents come and go theoretically every 4 years, but the unelected bureaucrats, the Faucis of the world, can stay in there. J. Edgar Hoover, they can stay in there 40, 50 years without ever being elected. And that type of power, you're entrenched, you're making connections, you're making deals. And so it's a pretty broad web of people. But the ones who are in my mind have always been calling the shots are the ones who profit the most from it. And they look at the parties coming and going. I've written in the past how in the late 1800s, uh, Grover Cleveland was elected president, and back then they used to call the rich people the robber barons,
Right.
and they were writing actual letters back and forth to each other saying, "Yeah, he's going to serve our purposes fine." He was a formerly I believe, an attorney for the railroad industry, so he was tied in with them. And then 4 years later, he got beaten by Benjamin Harrison. And then the robber baron said, "No, he's cool. He gets it. He knows what we're talking about." 4 years later, the only time it's ever happened so far is Grover Cleveland came back and reclaimed the White House because back then you could have as many terms as you want, but even if it was two, they don't have to be consecutive. And once again, the Jay Goulds and the Rockefeller class of people, the Carnegies, they were all like, it's all good. And the thing is that one of them was a Democrat, then a Republican was in, then it was a Democrat. So to the outside people, it's like, oh, look at this democracy at work. To the ones who are pulling the strings, it's like they're just changing the figureheads. As long as they don't stir up too much, it doesn't matter to us. And I think that's very illustrative that we're like a bull in a bullfight. We're looking at the cape instead of the matador a
Right. We
lot
missed
of
the
the
sword.
time.
We missed the sword behind it.
Yes. Yeah. And so they're very good at distracting our attention with very um it's not to say that politicians don't have power, for example, to use them, but they are theoretically elected. I mean, there should be term limits. They're entrenched forever, but these other powers, the unelected powers, like I said, the banker class, the technocrats, the intelligence agencies, we don't know their names, but they're
No.
behind the scenes. No matter what happens in 2024, many of them will still be, let's say, in the State Department a year later. The figureheads might change. The Secretary of State will change, but
Right.
the class that keeps the culture of the State Department never changes. So I don't think we have to even sway into. And I'm not disparaging anyone who talks about Illuminati or stuff like that, but I don't even
Right.
think we have to sway into that to make a convincing argument to everyday people.
And Cody says we could all dress up like matadors and confuse them. We
I
could do
love
that.
that.
But see, you know what? You bring. I'm gonna help. Let's see if I can sway you on something, Mickey.
Okay.
You brought up term limits. We have term limits. Every elected office in this country has term limits. You know that, right?
You mean that elections?
Yep. You have elections. Find somebody better. I've always felt that way.
I think in practice, in fact, I know in practice, excuse me, in theory, undeniably
Right.
correct. As long as we have lobbyists and so much money
Well,
in
that's
there,
an animal.
what's that?
lobbyists is a whole
Yeah.
different.
So we could agree that without imposing term limits, we could change the system so that the everyday voters could impose term limits. But when you have like congressional districts in which every 2 years the person who's been there forever is winning 96% of the vote, like, and then that people aren't even paying it. It doesn't even matter who's running against this
Oh
person.
yeah,
So you just realize that the
you know the name.
possibility of that flip flopping, unless that person was caught in some incredible scandal or died, even in that case, dead people have gotten votes too. So it's, I hear what you're saying, and I say, in theory, I totally agree. In practice, we and the electoral college for the presidential election is pretty tricky too. So it's not. There's a lot of reforms that would have to be made in order for that theory to become practice.
See, I'm a fan of ranked choice voting. The
Yes.
And what is it? Maine. There's like 3 or 4 states that have that for their own state elected officials. Go look it up, folks. Ranked choice voting. The entire country of Australia does it. But then I did some research on that, and they've already figured a way to screw that shit up too, where you get somebody like me who's a libertarian, and we kind of are considered leaning more right because of the fact that we're like, don't touch my guns and don't touch my money. And what ends up happening is that person ends up tying themselves to the conservatives also and going like, hey, we'll just work together and you can have my votes because at least you're kind of more leaning to
Uh,
it. But here, I like what they did here recently here in New York when they ran the election. The Libertarian Party tied in with the Green Party.
there you go.
Two opposite ends, but they were like, they don't want to give us time to play, and I don't want to give them time to play. So they just worked together. It didn't do nothing because this is the People's Republic of New York. You live here. You live here with me. The only city that matters in New York is the one you're in. You realize that?
Yeah.
The rest of it, you guys could be like, we want a sandwich tax. We're going to tax sandwiches. The next thing I know, up here in Albany, they're taxing me for. I don't even get. I don't get plastic bags anymore.
Same here.
Yeah, because in New York City, they were like, no more plastic bags.
Yeah.
I blame you guys for everything up here.
We should accept a fair amount of the blame.
I'm in Smallbany, brother. I'm in Smallbany. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
you guys are the capital, and nobody would know that. I think the average person would think that New York City's
Oh,
the capital.
absolutely. Look, the only party we need is Cody Party. Absolutely.
There we go.
But it really is. And it's one of those kind of things. But get back online here because
Can I ask you a libertarian question since you
yes,
brought it up?
absolutely.
As a libertarian, are you, um, in principle, against the regulation of corporations?
See, I am not against the regulation of corporations
Okay.
personally. The Libertarian Party would say no, but the Libertarian Party also believes that you should bring, as a Marine who spent 20 years, believes that you should bring every troop from around the globe back home and shut us off completely from the outside world. And also, they believe that you shouldn't have to have a driver's license to drive a car.
Hmm.
So you see what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
you can. So I believe corporations need regulations for the simple fact of if you look at. So here you go. Do you know the largest lobbying group in the country is? At
No.
least they were. It used to be the
Pharmaceuticals?
corporate prisons.
Oh.
Corporate prisons, and it might be changed now, but at one point in time, they were the largest lobbying group in the entire country. Was the corporate prison because it's a lot of money. After Sleepy Joe got a hold of it back in the 90s, him and Clinton, and calling people super predators and everything else, they get a hold of this. And I always love my favorite Joe line is the one where they said from back then is when he said, I don't care where you grew up, if you committed and I'm paraphrasing, I'm getting it wrong. I don't care where you grew up. If you committed a crime, we're still going to send you to jail. Like he didn't, people were like, hey, but there's situations here. We need to work on the communities. That's how you change things. No,
Yeah.
remember, this is also a guy who said his kids would never go to school with black children. He believed in, and this is the guy who's our president. He's also the one that got caught telling lies about his college record. He was like,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
one of two, you know, but either way, but I'm off on a tangent from you got me on a tangent, Mickey. I don't nobody ever gets me on a tangent
Well,
like
I'm also a podcaster here, so I
and you
flip the
got me on a
script on
tangent
you.
there for a moment. But yeah, so I mean, back to your original question. I think we need more they need to be regulated, but
Yeah.
the biggest one for me is they need to be regulated on their ability to, as you said, inject money into the political system, which actually goes back to a chief justice in 1972. It is God, what the hell was his name? He wrote a letter basically outlining for corporations on how to inject money into the political system. And if you look at it, he wrote the letter in, I want to say he wrote the letter in 70. Um, if my buddy Tom was around, he would tell me exactly who it was. The guy wrote the letter in the 1970. And at that point, 70, and I remember seeing the numbers, 70% of the Democratic Party funding came from unions.
Yeah.
This was in, and they did the study in like 72. By 76, the number starts dropping and corporations start putting more money into the Democratic Party. By 1980, it's a complete flip flop. The unions are putting less money in. Most of the Democrats' money is coming from corporations. They sit up there and they say, we're for the people. We want everyone. Now, you take just as much money as everyone else, and it blows my mind how much money they take. So that's why I say nothing will ever change until you get the money out of it. Nothing ever
Yes.
does. And look, and Cody, speaking of Clinton, him and Epstein seem to have been swept. Cody, him, Bill, and the Epstein thing and Epstein Island is unbelievable when you start digging into it. The fact that what was her name? His partner.
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yes. Isn't it interesting? Like her whole trial was like super
Oh
quiet
yeah.
and not a single name came out.
Not yet. Yeah. Yep.
And it never will. No name
Yeah.
is ever going to come out because if you knew the names that were on that, once in a while you get a name like pop up, like, hey, did you know this one went there? Did you know that one went there? And every so often it'll pop up, and then that kind of just disappears.
Yeah. Well, that connects back to like people pulling the strings because that salacious story which the corporate media would typically turn into like weeks of good ratings. Nobody's interested in that list,
Oh yeah,
and
no.
yeah, the Clintons' criminal history is horrifying. But I totally hear you. It's one of the great um, propaganda moves ever in how the Democratic Party to this day markets itself as for minorities and for the working man. And it's arguable whether they ever were, but certainly the numbers you cited for at least the past 50 years, they have completely moved in the opposite direction. And if you trace Joe Biden's career, you talk about someone he was elected, but he sort of was a lifetime bureaucrat.
Oh
How
yeah.
it's like 50 years ago when he was first elected. Like this is someone that is so deeply embedded in the system that he's internalized values that even if he didn't have those values back when he was Joe from Scranton, you can't be 50 like spend 50 years in that cesspool and maintain any moral values at this point. And like you said, he's the president.
Yep. And we have a question for you. Cody has our underground child trafficking stuff is disgusting with the people pulling the strings. It's so deeper. Cody, I can't think of Rami's last name, but she came on here. She's out in California, and she educated me on things that I had no idea because we all, hey, look, being libertarian, one of the things that the Libertarian Party talks about is legalization of things like prostitution, like in Vegas. And she talks about that when they legalized it in Germany, it actually the sex trafficking in Germany became worse because people no longer looked at it and said, well, hey, there's a problem over there. They said, well, that person wants to be there. They chose that as
Yeah.
a career.
Yeah.
So it hides it in that sense. And when she explained that to me, I was like, really? And she was like, absolutely. She goes, it became worse of a situation. And then she just talked about like a lot of the kids that get swept up in it.
Oh yeah.
it's internet, it's, hey, we'll be friends, and then they get kidnapped and get held, and a lot of times they're within miles of their actual home, and they get Stockholm syndrome. Like, I have to go do this. I have to do this for this person. It's
Yeah,
almost like a Stockholm type thing.
it is one of it, arguably the most insidious demonic um, culture in the entire planet, and they're so Machiavellian about it, like you said, where they're able to keep the victims within range of their home, but condition them in a certain way. And definitely, I don't know who the woman is, but maybe you'll give me the name afterwards that you had on the show because I'd love to talk to her. But it's a real misnomer that simply legalizing prostitution is the solution. The women are always the victims. Many cases they're underage for that matter. And there's something called the Nordic model that people could look into, but there are other models if you want to accept that this so-called business is going to continue. But you have to be wary of people that just blindly say, "Oh, let's just legalize it," because that's the point you said. And
Right.
so then it's now out of the public eye as something that we need to worry about. Meanwhile, women and children are suffering 24/7. So I couldn't
Absolutely.
agree more.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those ones where you're like, this doesn't make sense. But yeah, that was something I learned. And now Nate always has the most important question. He says, "What's your favorite go-to meal?" I'm gonna hit you with something different since you are in the city. And I'm not gonna hit you with the stupid pizza question. Do you have a favorite ethnic neighborhood to eat in?
Well, all right. So I'm going to really give away the parts unknown. Um, for anyone who doesn't know, New York City is made up of 5 boroughs. I live in Queens. The neighborhood in Queens that I live is Astoria, which
Okay.
is just over the East River from Manhattan, which, if you're a New Yorker, we only call Manhattan the city. If I'm going to talk to a friend and say, I'll meet you in the city, technically I'm in the city. I'm in the city talking to you, but Manhattan, where all the big buildings are and everything, that's the city. So I live in Astoria, which has been labeled, if not number one in the top three most ethnically diverse neighborhoods on the planet,
Oh,
not just
wow.
not just New York, America, on the planet. So I can stroll up and down blocks in Astoria and try an incredibly wide range of food. I'm not the most adventurous eater, and I have an affliction, you would say. I can't really eat much spicy food. It's not by choice. My older sister, she can put a jalapeno in her mouth and just chew it. I have a very strict threshold of spicy food. So if I'm walking down the block past a Thai restaurant, an Indian restaurant, a
Oh,
Bangladeshi restaurant, I have to go in and say, I want this meal and I want it mild. And then I make them get eye contact with me and I say, when I say mild, I mean white people mild. because 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 if I get mild by whatever ethnicity it is, I'm
oh,
sweating, my tongue is burning. So I I I've tried a lot of interesting foods.
oh.
Um, and most recently I tried a Korean restaurant here. It
Oh,
was
I love Korea.
outstanding. It's
Is that not
outstanding.
that to me? So it's funny you would say that. So my favorite neighborhood is K Town in the city in Manhattan. Up all, if you come out of doggone Penn Station and walk straight up to Sixth Ave,
Yep.
it's right there, K Town. And the Korean food to me is amazing. Like, and it's got a, and if you're, if you need that American flavor, it has such an American,
Yeah.
because of the American influences in Korea. It has such a vibe. But I'm gonna have to go with Cody on something right now. We may have just come up with a new show for you, where Mickey does a video challenge, one new place each week in the city of a food that you would normally be like, I'm not gonna eat that, and then your sister has to take you to that place and be like, all right, eat the food. And you're like, no, I don't want to eat it. Eat it, Mickey. And then you have to eat it at least a bite. I love this. We may have just come up with a new show.
Well,
Mickey eats something.
I, it's hysterical. And plus, the coordination would be tricky because my sister lives in Texas, but we,
Oh,
we,
even
we
better. It- Even but see, that's even better. So your sister eats the meal in Texas. Like I don't know what part of Texas she's in.
Near Houston.
Oh, they have the food blend that I want to try so bad in Texas. Viet Cajun. That's a thing.
Wow.
Viet Cajun, because they have such a large, being on the water, they have such a large Vietnamese population from after the Vietnam War that ended up in Houston, that they have fused Cajun food and Vietnamese, and it's called Viet Cajun.
Wow. So you don't have a spice issue, obviously.
Um, not when I first eat it, maybe after I eat it, but
Okay.
that's a whole
Okay.
different story. But
Wow.
I enjoy food with actual like so. But you know what? I grew up in Baltimore, eating steamed crabs with Old Bay seasoning caked all over them. You know, you put Old Bay on your corn. You know, you take buttered corn and just stick Old Bay on it. I even do that now with my kids with the steam bags of corn. Drop a
Uh,
pat of butter and sprinkle Old Bay over it. And my kids eat it.
okay. Well, let me defend my food honor here. I will say my my dad was born in Italy,
Okay.
and he married my mom, who was primarily Irish. And at the time, my Italian grandparents still lived in New York. So my grandma taught my mom all her secrets. So my mom, who was primarily Irish, became the best Italian cook wherever we lived. My friends always wanted to come over and have dinner at my house. So I always had delicious home cooked flavorful meals. It wasn't like I had to eat bland. I mean, so you're talking garlic, oregano, basil, like the
Right.
Italian seasoning. So I was blessed to enjoy that type of meal, but I found out very young, even going to a pizza place where there's chili pepper that you can put
Yeah.
on, taking a bite of that, I'm like, oh, this is not my thing. And I regret it. I would love to try more foods, but I will say that because I grew up with home cooked gourmet style meals from the old country, I have a deep appreciation for eating. I just sometimes have to be selective.
And Mickey, I think we could probably talk food. These are my favorite shows and I'm going to give away. Uh, we got to get ready to close the bar up here soon, and I'm going to give away some secrets. Mickey learned something very valuable. I do very little. I never tell my guests what we're going to talk about. I actually almost get uncomfortable when they're like, "So, what is our conversation going to be about?" I'm like, "Stuff. We're going to talk about stuff. Probably the stuff you do." And Mickey, you have been phenomenal with that
Uh,
because and I understand. You know what? Most Italian meals. So I'm just the opposite of you in the sense of my grandmother was our first generation born in the US from Sicily.
okay.
My grandfather, that side's all and this is on my father's side, that side of his family were all mostly Irish living in North Carolina. And then my mother's side, Irish living in Tennessee. So I understand there's not a lot of like people are like, well, Pasta Diablo, Italian hots. Yeah, there's two things. Most Italian meals are not like known pepperoncinis and
Yeah.
with the cherry peppers. You
Yeah.
know, there's like a handful of things, but that's not really the Italian dishes. You're not going in and being like, "Hey, I want my face caught on fire in this." Like
Yeah.
that's not what you're looking for a good Italian dish. So, but I want to go back to post woke for a second here, kind of bring it back full circle. So, how often are you doing those shows?
I'm doing roughly once a week. What I'm finding um, fun, not a challenge, but fun is the scheduling part where I'm seeking out guests, and quite often, you're at the mercy of their schedule. I like how we were talking before, how methodically you're able to schedule, and that is a goal of mine without a doubt. But I would say, I'm not going to do the math off the top of my head, but if I think it would average out once a week. And interesting, I just wanted to say I picked up when we were interacting, I picked up on your vibe that it wasn't about let me give you some links and you're going to do research. And I was really looking forward to it because I have some podcasts, um, my closest friend, Allison Gray, she's a musician from When Humans Had Wings. People should check that out. When we're on, we freelance like this. It's outstanding. But I'll give you. You know the Utah Jazz point guard John Stockton?
Absolutely.
So I had him on the show. And the reason why I had him on the show was because he is quite outspoken and knowledgeable about things like masks and vaccines and topics that are in the news and have been in news for 3 years. So when I interviewed him, first of all, I was kind of fanboying a bit, like it's John
Absolutely.
Stockton. But I watched interviews of him, took notes, and so I like doing that research. But I have been contemplating a switch in post woke where I blend in more freestyle conversations. And tonight, I'm having so much fun talking to you. It's an excellent, convincing point that this can be just as rewarding. I'm not saying one over the other, but
Right.
I need balance where I don't always want to be that I have to get every single fact right. Instead, it's like a vibe, taking tangents, and I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate that vibe that you've created here.
Absolutely, bro. And John Stockton, I just watched a video about him where somebody was covering guy was getting interviewed about covering Stockton in when he was with the Utah Jazz, and he was covering Stockton and he did something and ran into Stockton, and Stockton just like two-hand blasted him and was like, fuck you. And you don't think about that mindset with John
Yeah,
Stockton from that era, but at the same time, that era to me was a much more like today's game is a lot of finesse. They're
yeah,
big, they're way bigger, but that era was a lot of like, I will beat you like you owe me money, kid.
yeah.
Like if you
Yeah,
go
they
back,
didn't call flagrant fouls back then, and
like
and
you look at
Stockton's roaming around at 6'1", making the Hall of Fame, making the dream team. I
right,
mean, I have
right.
nothing but admiration for him.
Oh God, like that would be so cool to me. Like you talk to Stockton, and I mean, and I can remember him passing off the ball to grandmama. Remember grandmama? Like he was God, I don't know if there was ever a better assist man in the history of the
Yeah,
NBA. He just he was different. And he played such a non-selfish game.
yeah. If
Like,
you, I don't want to go so far off here, but
I know.
if you go to YouTube and watch his Hall of Fame speech when he enters the Hall of Fame, he's a total point guard. He spends the entire 11, 12 minutes pointing out everyone else who helped him get there. Not a word about himself the whole time. The
Love
entire
it.
speech is point guard. He's just dishing out assists the entire time. So I had such a great time talking to him.
Look, and Cody's still on the food. I feel like we're really expanding Mickey's reach with food challenges. What will be after he eats the tagline? What would be? Oh, you got to have a tagline after you eat that. You got to just go back to that's a good. Old, old tagline. So, do you have anybody coming up? Upcoming shows like somebody like you're like, hey, I'm getting ready to. Now your shows are all recorded and then you nothing live, right?
Nothing live, yeah,
Okay,
and it's audio only for now. I kind of like it, but I do want to do this eventually. But I have had a unique cross section where it depends on, like, you would get amped with John Stockton, but then if I told someone else that Dr. Robert Malone was on, who invented the mRNA technology but is now speaking out against vaccines, they might get amped. But coming up next month, I'm going to speak to a woman who is a religious scholar who got it's really hard to explain how, but she got caught up in the world of UFOs, and she wrote this epic book about putting the mindset of, like, the search for UFOs from coming from the point of an academic from the religious world. She happens to be Catholic, and in the book she winds up at the Vatican, where they have an incredible observatory at the top of the Vatican. I did not know that till I
I
read
didn't
the
know
book.
that either.
Yeah, so Diana Pasulka, her name is. So she's someone that's coming up relatively soon that I am really excited to just give her space to talk, because she's got such a fascinating background.
Oh, that is. See, now you're so square in my wheelhouse because I always tell people I have a degree in human resource management, and if I could go back, I would get a degree in theology, and not because of any more reason. then, and this, you're going to call me a crazy person, but I just finished this book called Never Split the Difference. It's written by an FBI negotiator who now runs a company who works called Black Swan that works with other companies on negotiations.
Okay.
And one of his parts of that book, he's like, know your opponent's religion, know who you're negotiating with religion. It
Wow.
affects it affects so much of how we operate and how we do things from different moral standpoints. And I've always said, because I love sales training, I love different sales related things. I've always said that I wish I would have studied theology. And I go to church every Sunday, so it probably makes you sound like a horrible person. But to understand other
Oh,
religions, to be able to have more educated conversations, like you really want to mess. Look, I'm a Methodist. I'm right there. You want to mess them up and explain to a Catholic that at the birth of Christianity, there was another religion that, the last I heard, there's still like 250,000 people on the planet that still follow this. Don't ask me the name of it. It was one of those History Channel shows. That their main person in their religion, their savior, was locked inside of a cave where he had to fight a demon for 3 days, defeated the demon, and ascended through a hole in the cave, and then saved all of his people.
nice. On the third day, he rose again. Wow.
It's it's one of those ones where it's like, so to understand these things and to understand these conversations always have just been fat. So I think that show, now you'll record that this week or next week?
Probably towards the end of May. In between, I have a couple other people lined up. I recently got in touch with people who have been injured by vaccines
Ooh.
and have had issues with finding anyone to believe them or listen to their story because for obvious reasons. And
Right.
so it's tricky working around the schedule because I'm trying to get a handful of people on the show at once, but that will probably be the next show. But the one I mentioned, Diana, is one that we have. We don't have the date scheduled, but I can't wait for that one. But I'm going to urge you: don't. It's not too late to study theology. However you do it. I mean, you don't have to do it officially sitting in a classroom. But I'm with you 100% on that.
I find it completely fascinating. I've always said that if you know someone's religion and you know where they eat, you know everything about a community. Those are the two things. I used to tell my recruiters that worked for me. They'd be like, "Oh, I can't find nobody." I'm like, "All right, where's everybody eat at?" And they'd be like, "What? Where does everyone in this town eat?" And they'd be like, "I don't know what you're talking about." I'm like, "All right, let's figure it out." And I would go to the schools and I'd be like, "Hey, it's around lunchtime. I'm going to go get something. Is there somewhere local that I can go eat at? I'm not really looking for a McDonald's or nothing like that." "Oh, well, go to this place or go to that place." And I
Yep.
would go to that place and then I would talk to the waitress or talk to the owner, and I'd have a nice conversation because I was in uniform, so they wanted to talk to me. And they would tell me everything about the town that I needed to know. And they would be like,
Beautiful.
and oh, the factories, closed 10 years ago. Everybody works at the Walmart distribution center. This is, the only opportunities. All right. These are all things you use in a sales conversation.
Yeah, and you also just use it to interact with humans face to face. I mean, we're hardwired to have these types of conversations and find
Absolutely.
out where the communities are, like you said, in the places of worship, in the place where they eat. So I love that idea. But you just said you're Methodist.
Yeah, United Methodist. We're going through a big change
Oh,
right now too.
okay, because when you said Italian and Irish mixed in there, I was like, how are you not Catholic? That's
Oh, that's a whole all right. So we'll go a couple of minutes over. So I was born Catholic. You know,
okay.
my mother was Baptist. My mother couldn't marry my father until she told the priest that, and which is so creepy now as you think about it sometimes, told the priest that she promised to raise me Catholic. And then they would let my mother and father marry in a Catholic church. So they got married in a Catholic church. Uh, Went to Catholic school for 6 years. I still say my prayers with my hands folded, make the little
Yep.
cross at the back,
Yep.
whole 9 yards. Fast forward, my two oldest sons, I was on base and they were getting baptized. And my ex-wife, she was actually raised Greek Orthodox, and we're trying to find something. So we said, you know what, we'll just go with the Protestant, whatever it was on base. So he gets there, and it's a Methodist preacher. And he's like, I always think back that the dude was just wacky. He was like, we're like, yeah, hey, you're doing our kid's baptism. He's like, oh, I am? Oh, okay. And so he does the whole thing. We get done, still looking for a church that fits with my ex-wife. We went to a UCC church, United Church of Christ. Wasn't a bad church. Really liked it. Very similar to Methodist. Move on. My son, Dylan, he's 13. He was born on a Friday night, if I remember. No, Friday morning. And my ex-wife had a C-section, so she had to stay in the hospital a little bit longer. We had been looking for the right church. I walked into my current church, Calvary United Methodist in Latham, New York. I walked in there on that Sunday and have been there ever since. And I've always said that because of the way my other children were baptized, God meant for me to be a Methodist. That was his plan. And I always refer to Methodist. It's the Pepsi one of Catholic, all the same great flavor, just none of the guilt.
I like the sound of that. I went to 12 years of Catholic school. So I've been taught by priests and nuns, and I did the inevitable lapsed Catholic thing. And I view myself now as a prodigal son returned back on some level, but not in a traditional Catholic way. And I share the regret that you have, because I don't know whether it was the teachers I had during those 12 years or my resistance to learning, but I feel like I could have learned a lot more and appreciated a lot more about the stories of the scriptures and the gospels at the time. But it just was something that if I had, it was in high school, you just had math and science and social studies and religion. It was a class you had, and you just did what you did in every class. You memorized what you needed to do to take the test. And I didn't feel a connection to it. And much later in life, I had to forge that connection myself. And like you said, it could be the path that I was meant to be on. But I do look back and say, man, 12 years, I wish I would have picked up a little more
bit more
out of that. Yeah.
Well, look, folks, I hope you enjoyed listening to me and Mickey talk. Obviously, you can find his show. It's a weekly show. He's got about 80 some episodes. He's written 700 books by the time this is all over with. We just keep adding to the number. Please go check out his show at Post Woke. And that's just like it sounds, Post, P-O-S-T, Post Woke, W-O-K-E podcast. Check out the Post Woke podcast. If you're finding us through Mickey's show and this is the first time you found us, please give a like, follow, share, all those things. I know it sounds cliche, but listen to me. You don't know about Mickey. I don't know about Mickey unless you do those things. This is how we get found. This is how the algorithms work. The technologists, he had a great term and I can't think of what Mickey called them, the tech people behind it all. This is how they've put it together. This is how it's worked, that they get this opportunity and they control that part to it. So please give us like, follow, share, whether it be on Apple, if you're listening to the audio, whether it be on YouTube, give us a follow. That means something. That's how we all grow. That's how this gets bigger. That's how this entire thing gets bigger. Again, if you've got a sticker, you got something you're supporting, sticker and a cause, always follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, TikTok, all those kind of things. You can always follow us on those things. Now, Mickey, because I know you listen, I think this is 176 or 177. I know you said you got to 172 or 170.
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. And
I'm working on it.
You're working on getting through all of them. I know you went through all of them. So you know that the rule at the end of every show, and don't log off after this, we got to talk for a moment. The rule at the end of every show is very simple. The guest always gets the final word. So what's the final word, Mickey?
Well, I'm going to give you the final word I use on the Post Woke podcast when I wrap up, and that's keep your guard up.
All righty, folks. Be sure to push your stool in.
This has been an Earplug Podcast presentation. Found on earplugpodcast.com, iTunes, SoundCloud, and wherever your favorite podcasts are found.